All right. So everyone, welcome to the Enrollment Charts first annual call to subscribers. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about breadth. And I want to explain what breadth means when you talk about data. So the easiest way I can explain it is if you have a group of soldiers, like a battalion, and that battalion is meant to cross enemy lines, right? And at first they're a whole battalion, right? And they're moving towards the enemy, and some of the soldiers begin to kind of fall off. And by the end, when you get to the finish line, to the enemy line, the number of people that you have with you, that is the breadth. So if you have just three people, right, that breadth is very thin, right, and easily the enemy is going to overturn you, and the battle will be a loss. But if you get to the end and you have, say, 50% of the battalion with you, that looks pretty optimistic that you might be able to hold your ground. So this is what we mean when we talk about breadth. And when we talk about it in regards to international student mobility, we're talking about how many countries are involved in whatever trend we're seeing. If it's an uptrend, are all the countries involved, or just a few? And so we're going to dive into that now. Now, this chart here, right, this is the one that everyone knows. And if you don't, this and all the data that we're talking about today comes from opendoors, the recent data release where they're looking at 2023, 2024. So currently there's a 1.1 million international students that are studying in the United States, right? And now what I want to show you is, if this is all you know about that, then this is where breadth really starts to get interesting. So this here, when I was on the podcast with Education USA with Dina Archer, I talked about the advanced decline line, right? And advanced decline line is a fairly interesting formula. It's fairly simple, but what you do is you take all the countries that send an additional students this year than they did last year, and you consider those advancers. And then you take all the countries that send less students than they did last year, and you consider those the decliners. And then you're basically subtracting the decliners from the advancers. So let's say 10 countries, 10 countries send more students this year than they did last year. Those would be your advancers. If your decliners, let's say you have 8 countries that send fewer than they did last year, those would be your decliners, and you'd be left with a balance of +2. And you would add that 2 to the previous value on the advanced decline line. Now, Ted, I know we've talked about this chart. Does that make sense to you, what I'm talking about? Do you have questions or things that you feel like I need to elaborate a bit on?
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on, maybe like right over here, or will we get into that a little bit later?
No, I think that's actually a great question. So, okay, so guys, so if you notice the blue line, that's your AD line, or advanced decline line. Basically between 2002, 2003 to, say, 2008, 2009, you can even extend that to 2011, 2012. It got pretty rocky. And what we can take from that is the number of countries that were increasing the number of students they were sending to the US was volatile, and a lot of times in downtrends. And you'll notice that the total number of students in the orange, that didn't make nearly as drastic of a downturn. But by following the advanced decline line, you can have a sense of what's going to happen prior to it actually happening. You can get a sense of, okay, the total number of students might ultimately follow this advanced decline line. So it's a very good measure of breadth, and lets us know that, hey, this is worthwhile for me to pay attention to. You'll notice that the advanced decline line right now is at an all-time high, right? That's great. And if you're having a hard time seeing the slides by chance, I do recommend you make that the screen share full screen for yourself, just so you can see that better. And you can, another thing, if you look at that bottom right there around 2020, 2021, that was a COVID. When you look at that, you see that the advanced decline line increased drastically, right? much faster than the total international students did, right? That would have been a tip that, hey, there's some growth that's about to come, and come it did. We certainly did well. And just if you're not aware, I'm using the right axis for that advanced decline line for 350 to -50, and then the left axis 1.2 million. That is for the total students. Now, this one's a little different, right? So this one, again, we have the same US total international students on the top. What I've done below that is some basic statistics, creating an average, right? I took 5 years, so I added up all the students from 5 years and divided it by 5, right? That's an average. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to show how that average operated over time. And so what you can see here is that we certainly peaked in what is that, 2015, 2016, with 63% of countries above their 5-year moving average. And that's their own individual 5-year moving average. So each one of these countries would have their own average. This is another great tell, Ted. You can see how it kind of starts dipping down over 2015, 2016, 2016, 2017. If somebody had decided, you know what, while that's figuring itself out, I'm going to take a little money off the table and I'm not going to go so hard in recruiting. Well, you obviously realize that downtrend ended with COVID. I mean, man, you could have saved yourself a lot of pain. But also, I mean, imagine if you would have been able to advise senior leadership at your university that things look a little rocky back in 2017, 2018. And you're like, I think maybe we might want to not recruit as much or not put as much money into it. You'd be leagues ahead of everyone when that downtrend continued and bottomed out in COVID. Obviously, it's not predictive, but this is key value. I mean, this is really valuable information. Another thing you might want to look at is that you see that 63% is the previous high in this data. It's also where we are right now. Now, you could be a contrarian and say, oh, well, maybe that's the maximum participation we're eligible for, right? And you would need more recent data to make that decision. And I'm happy to say that that's what Enrollment Charts is going to be doing. We're going to be doing these monthly calls where we'll actually be telling you data as it comes in for those people who become clients. So I think that's valuable. But at this point, based on the Open Doors data, which is from 23 to 24, and we start looking at the recruitment cycle of next academic year, right, 25, 26, clearly you can see there's a 2-year lag on this data. We're all very grateful that we have it, but more up-to-date data is really needed because that's a cliffhanger right there, 63. Does it turn tail and head backwards, or does it keep moving forward?
So is that kind of why this might, I mean, could you go into a little bit more about why that might be a concern? Because, I'm looking at this chart and I see us back where we were, all good, right? But why would that maybe be more of a concern and something we need to look deeper into?
So, yeah, when you talk about breadth, things can become overextended, right? And that means that, like, it's kind of like if you look at that bell curve that we all learned back in school, and you start hitting certain standard deviations, you get to a point to where it's likely to have what I would call a rubber band reaction, right? And I wrote about this in the blog on India on our website. But that means that something gets stretched to an extreme. Now, we don't know if 63% is an actual extreme because Open Doors data only goes back to 1999, and it takes 5 years before we have a moving average that we can really utilize. But from 1999 to 2024, 63% was the most we've seen that rubber band extended, right? It just pulls out, pulls out, pulls out. And what happens when you let go of a rubber band? It slaps back. So the question is 63% a level of participation that is worthy of caution, or is it a level of participation that is incredibly exciting and you definitely want to be continuing to ride that? Hoping that answered the question, Ted. It was a good one, so thanks for asking that.
Thank you. Thanks for going into that.
Yeah, sure. So if we go to the next one, Ted, if you wouldn't mind maybe erasing that annotation, it seemed to kind of hang on there. So next, so we've talked about breadth, right? So that lets us know that we're at a situation where there's a lot of countries that are participating in a very exciting upward move. We're wondering if the rubber band is stretched, and we're also wondering, well, obviously we need to continue doing our job. So where should we be doing it? And I think this is where things get really exciting. I do teach market selection at the College of Business for Louisiana Tech. So I definitely, this is definitely something that's close to my heart. I think Ted and I have come up with a number of really cool ways of looking at this. So let's kind of dive in here. There's a lot happening here. So this is one of the charts you definitely want to make sure you got a full screen on. Um, okay, all right. So let's break this down for you, right? I think everyone here realizes that pre-COVID is a valuable data point, right? And specifically the highs of pre-COVID, right? We were rocking and rolling there. Momentum had certainly waned, which you could see in those earlier charts when we talk about the total international enrollments. But that's certainly the goal, is to be above that, right? To be above that previous high. And these countries are not. Right. In fact, what we've got here is a downtrend going basically down and to the left, where you have an extreme of Iraq, which is 62% below where it was pre-COVID, right? Or you have ones that are just barely below, and that's when you got Taiwan at -1% or France at -2%. So the point. Okay, now my dog just said hello, so I apologize for that. So the thing is that when you look at this, this is not where you want to be, right? If you go here to recruit, you're taking an unnecessary risk, because these countries are not in uptrends. They are certainly in downtrends. And you are placing a hard to win bet where probability is not on your side. And there's some notable people in this little group here, right, of underperformers. Saudi Arabia. Many of you remember the Sachem days. Yeah, Saudi Arabia is not Sachem happy. They have not been for a while. China, right? I think we all know that we all used to be in China pretty hardcore, and we're not there as much as we used to be, right? Well, the reason why is because China is certainly in a downtrend. But then you look at like South Korea, right? So if you have China in a downtrend and South Korea in a downtrend, that means your top three sending countries to the United States are out, right? They're not really contributing to that upward move we're seeing when you look at, hey, why are we making new all-time highs for the total international enrollments? And then you've got, you'll see soon that we're pretty, very positive for South and Central Asia. We're very positive Europe. But you'll even notice that even Europe, you have to be a very careful picker of markets. United Kingdom, France, not where you want to be. Vietnam, hey, Vietnam's in a downtrend. And this goes back to something that I said on the podcast with Adina Archer, that a lot of times in our industry, we pick markets for the weirdest reasons. Maybe it's because we walk in and we shoot from the hips, or maybe it's because of recency bias. And well, Vietnam did well, say 5 years ago. Maybe it should still be doing well now. But the thing is that data lets us know whether our ideas have merit. So if I go to a conference and someone's like, "Oh my gosh, Vietnam, we got to go," and then you're like, "Okay," and so you tell all your buddies, and the next thing you know, you're on a flight to Vietnam with you and all of your competitors to go try and do well in a market that's actually in the downtrend. So following this kind of data is key, and definitely this chart is, I think, this is a money chart right here. This one's good, and so we'll definitely be sharing that as well. We're going to move on to the next one. Ted, if you wouldn't mind letting her in from the waiting room, I'd really appreciate it. All right, so these are the two kings, right? The big two. This is India and China. I will let you know that India and China are now 54% of the total international enrollment in the United States, right? And that number has been increasing year after year after year. Now, this is particularly interesting when you think about, well, hey, didn't we just talk kind of about China as being in a downtrend? That means that India in 23, 24 was at an absolute extreme, which we definitely talked about in that blog that we posted, where I want to say it was like something like 280 standard deviations away from the mean or something like that. I mean, it was ridiculous, the extent that it got. And India certainly was that rubber band that popped back. China certainly was that rubber band that popped back. But it's, as of this data, 23, 24, India is rocking and rolling. I think when you start talking about the monthly calls that we want to be doing with our clients, you'll realize that there's a lot of value in having, to the moment updates on, hey, how are these two kings performing, and how are the other countries carrying the weight if they begin to underperform. So anyway, so I think this chart's pretty straightforward. I'm going to move on to the next one here. All right, so this is the trifecta. Okay, the trifecta means three wins, one after another, right? So you're talking about 3-year gains, and what that means is, let's say year 1 you have X, and year 2 you have X plus 1, and year 3 you have X plus 2, right? You've increased each year, right? So that is by definition a solid uptrend. And the countries that you see here are gold mines when it comes to student enrollments. So take your screenshot if you want. I promise we're going to send these charts out. But if you are not in a single one of these countries, you need to call us. we need to talk about how we can help you figure out how to identify countries that are growing and growing quickly. Now you'll notice, Ted, we were talking about this. I mean, you've got some of the stands here. These are not nearly the volume centers of India, right? And so Ted and I were having a discussion about this yesterday, and we were saying that basically you will need to look into this and say, hey, just because this country had the strongest growth, just because it's a trifecta, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have the volume that my school might be expecting in the next upcoming year. Or you might, if you pick some of the smaller ones, you might want to say, okay, I'm definitely going to at least 5 or 6 of these in 1 year. Whereas if you pick a big one and you feel like you can make an impression quickly, you might say, okay, well, I'll pick 1 or 2 of the big ones. But definitely these are the exact opposite of what we saw with those ones that are below those pre-COVID highs.
So even though like Kyrgyzstan's up, 198%, the volume may not be there that we want, but it could be worth looking into.
Yeah, because you got to realize, people in this call, if you've been involved in international recruiting at all, you know that percentages are important, right? Because we don't go to a country and then the next year have 100 students. I mean, it rarely happens that way, right? Instead, you might have 3, and then the next year you have 5, and the next year maybe you have 7. Maybe the next year you also have 7, but the next year you have 12. And right, that incremental growth. It's easier to measure the ROI on your efforts when you start thinking about the percentage of growth, the rate of change. And rate of change is huge. We really need to be looking at that. We need to be looking at which countries are growing the fastest in our own respective institutions, but also which countries are sending more and more students at a faster rate of change. One thing I talked about also in the podcast with Adina Archer in Education USA was I was talking about how Uzbekistan is growing faster than India. And you can see that here. I mean, you can say, okay, well, it's not just Uzbekistan, right? You've got 6 countries that were growing at a faster rate than India, right? And so if India is the one to beat, well, I now know, okay, those 6 are going to be key to my strategy in beating India. If India is the index, right? If India is the S&P 500, I want to be in the ones that are outperforming it, right? Anyway, all right, I think we can move on. So one thing that we did, and this is, I think this is cool. I think this is pretty cool. I think Ted thinks it's pretty cool too. So what we wanted to do is we realized that there is a spectrum of experience on this call and with people that might want to become our clients. Those people that are maybe very skilled at market selection might not see as much value in these high performing numbers, but you might see value around that, I'd say between 7 and 5. So let me break this down for you. So what we have done is we have gone through numerous mathematical calculations to determine the strength of different regions. And so we can then compare all of them to one another. It might be hard to say, well, I don't know how to compare South and Central Asia to say West Africa. Well, we've cracked that nut. And we have numerous values that we attribute to each one of these regions, and can tell you without a doubt that South and Central Asia is definitely where you want to be if you're looking at regional recruitment. So if you're the kind of person that likes to fly in and visit a bunch of countries in a circle, if you're not in South and Central Asia, you got to get there, right? And that's followed by West Africa, right? So West Africa scores an 8, whereas South and Central Asia scores a 9 in our regional scores. But those of you who are kind of in those markets that have already got an established strategy, that's when you start looking at those that are scoring around 7, 6, and 5. South America, Europe, Southeast Asia, right? That's when you start seeing, wait a minute, this is where I need to start diversifying my recruitment strategy. This is where I want to be looking at some exploratory markets and moving forward. And I think in the next few slides, we kind of we give you the cake and let you eat it too. This is the country specific score for South and Central Asia. So you can see there's our Kyrgyzstan, and we love it. It's a powerful country. It's growing rapidly. Bangladesh following, and then you've got India and Uzbekistan, right? Pakistan below that, and then you get into the fives, and the fives, at that point it's kind of it's iffy. 23, 24, no one knew the power that we're going to be seeing out of Nepal, but at that point, it certainly was kind of an average player, while the to the left, you see the big boys. So if you were saying, hey, I want to build a recruitment strategy and I need to know where to go, well, the enrollment chart scores are pretty handy because you just say, oh, well, great, okay, I know exactly where I need to go. And there's no guesswork. It's all data based. It's all mathematically based. So there's no shooting from the hips here. There is no bias. Nothing like that is affecting our numbers.
So
So anyway, so I think there's a lot to go here. Those universities that want to build new pathways, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. Maybe you're not in Pakistan. There's a fair coming up, so definitely markets I'd be looking at.
so sorry not to make you go back to the previous
Yeah.
slide, but
Oh yeah.
we could for just a moment. So if I'm new to the recruiting space or training someone up to take over the recruiting, these South and Central Asia, West Africa, these might be good places for us to look, safe places to look. But if we're experienced and we're looking for new exploratory markets, we might feel safer looking somewhere in the middle of these charts. But I just think that is really cool that if someone is coming in and trying to either revamp a program or is new to the space, these are going to be just really good guides for you to jump in and hopefully have some success. So.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so Ted, let's say that you come at my university and you're making a pitch for a product as a vendor, right? And you're saying, yeah, we're really going to grow your enrollments by focusing in North Africa, Caribbean, and Central Africa. At that point, I would stop listening to you and I'd start playing, Candy Crush on my phone, because I realize you don't know anything, right? You don't know what you're talking about. That's not a statement by you, Ted. That's just saying that if someone came in and presented that as a strategy, that would be just a foolish thing. Whereas if someone comes in and says South and Central Asia, West Africa, South America, and Europe, I would at least know that they know what's going on. But then I would also say, well, I don't need to listen to you either because, well, I already know this because I'm a client of Enrollment Charts. So yeah.
All
All right. So anyway, so I think we talked enough about South and Central Asia. Did you have anything on this slide, Ted, that you wanted to add?
No.
No. Okay. All right. We'll rock and roll and get out of here. All right. So here's West Africa. Now, West Africa is an interesting one because you have so many small countries, right? So it's really important that when you look at these countries, you need to be looking at the total number of students coming to the United States, because you might quickly say, oh, well, that's not really viable for us. But definitely Ghana outperforming Nigeria is a big deal. And if you're not data heavy, or if you're not in those markets recruiting, you might not know that, but Ghana is definitely outperforming Nigeria, and that is significant. Senegal is certainly a good one, but Cote d'Ivoire quickly jumps down to 6 with Sierra Leone, and then at that point, I just kind of lose interest. So I think that if you're going to go to West Africa, the good thing about it is you have a very small number of countries that you really need to be present in. Anything else that you do, like if you want to go and visit one of the other countries, that's fine. It's just proving the ROI is important. And actually, Ted, I think it's important. Like we talked about this the other day. Sorry, Ted's like my best friend, so we talk a lot. So if you hear me say I've been talking to him, I apologize. So the thing is that every one of us needs to be adding value to our university, right? And we all know that from COVID, right? Because we know that when suddenly the numbers crashed, and if we didn't have a strategy that we could explain, or we weren't able to really advise senior leadership, if we weren't the smartest person in the room, many of our jobs came into question. And those of you on the call, some of you are new. Well, I would say that maybe the reason why you're new is because there wasn't a way that during COVID for people to say, "Hey, look, data is on my side." And so, hold on one sec, guys. Just need to make sure. Okay. All right. So, sorry, one of my buddies, Nate Myers, who was on the podcast with me, just a message said he had to jet. So anyway, sorry for the disruption, guys. So the thing is that when we're talking about value added, we're really talking about two things: either reducing cost or increasing ROI. And so you can use this data to reduce costs at your university by saying, "Hey, look, we're not going to go to every country, right? We're not going to go to every country in West Africa. We don't need to put me in a hotel. We don't need to feed me. We don't need to get airfare. We don't need to get buses. We don't need to join tours. I just need to go to these two." Right. So what you've done is you've reduced cost to your university. The other way you're adding value is by increasing the ROI, right? By saying, I'm going to make darn sure that my university makes a good amount of money, and we're going to do that by utilizing the enrollment chart scores, the EC scores, and be able to pick those countries. All right, now next one, I think we can jump through these. South America. I did a poll just to give you an idea of how data might not be driving the majority of our decisions. I did a poll on Globetrotters United about 8 months ago, and I said, "What is the number one country in Latin America?" And it was a trick question. I knew the answer, right? I had run the data. I knew the numbers, and the guesses were everything but Peru. Colombia, Brazil, Chile, Bolivia. No one mentioned Venezuela, but that's a sad story. But the thing is that nobody mentioned Peru, and so right there, that's the best value add that you can give to your university by becoming one of our clients. Say, "Hey, look, yeah, we're going to South America, but we're going to Peru, maybe Colombia, right?" That right there could easily make your efforts really, really useful to your university. All right, now this one, in retrospect, I realize it's too much. So we're going to be breaking this up into Eastern Europe and Western Europe in the future. So my apologies on that. I'm just moving something here out of the way. So what I see when I look at this, I see that Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia are where I want to be 100%. And I guarantee most of you probably are not. Europe is a great way to diversify your markets. I'm guaranteeing that many of you probably are not really thinking of Europe as a good place to be recruiting. Most of us are thinking, "Oh, well, South Asia, STEM, blah blah blah." The two kings. Let's look at India. Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia are kind of rocking it, and we know that Europe is tied with South America in the EC regional scores. So definitely those three are ones that I want to be looking at. And then you get into some nice Western Europe with Spain and Italy. Ukraine might be a little challenging to recruit in, but there might be ways that you can work with government efforts or things like that to get those students to your university. Certainly in 23 to 24, they were doing pretty well with filling seats at universities. Sorry, water break. All right, and that's it. That's the call. That's that's the way we're looking at things. And now, Ted, if you don't mind, just kind of maybe I'll hand it off to you here. But so someone joins for the this annual call that we do, which is always free, always open to subscribers and other people like that, as a chance to look at the open doors data. But why? What would be the benefit of becoming a client? Do you want to kind of go through that?
Yeah, so this is open doors data, but if you were to become a member or join our community, we'd have monthly live calls, which are going to be, there's going to be seasonal data, much more actionable than what we're going over today. And so we're going to have data, we're going to be using data that is as recent as we can get it. You'll get recordings of those calls, slide decks, charts with the EC scores, which I think are super cool and super valuable. We'd love to hear, your opinions on all of that. If you have anything to add to that, Jay, go ahead, or we can move on to the next
Well,
slide.
no, I mean, I think it's important to ask, how would that aid you in what you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're having a call with your dean, your SIO, or your president, or whatever, and they're saying, hey, what are we going to be doing? What markets are we looking at? To know that visa issuance is up in these five countries, and has been doing so exponentially over the last 5 months. You want to talk about those countries. And I guarantee you that if you use our charts in those discussions, by being a client, you'd have our decks. You'd be able to say, yeah, and this is why. This is why I think that. And by all means, there's something that's not up here also, and that's the ability to reach out to Ted and I. I mean, we both want to see you succeed. I do this because I don't think I could stop if I wanted to. I love the data. I mean, anyone that's recruited with me has seen me wear my nerdy hat. So it's like this is me. This is what I like to do, and it's a great chance for me to hang out with my buddy Ted, and us for us to work on these things. But it's a way for you to really shine. And shining with up-to-date data that you're not getting elsewhere, and certainly not getting it in a visually appealing that's hard to say, visually appealing way that's actually actionable and intuitive. So I'm hoping that there's some real value here for sure.